a political society, in our present world, the real bottom line is the people, the groups, the publics from which all decision-making ultimately arises. And as the public itself comes to understand this more and organizations come to understand this more, of course, public relations professionals become increasingly important senior management members in all organizations. And we're seeing that everywhere, not just in the United States, by the way, but as democratization occurs around the world, we're seeing it around the world. This is wonderful, of course, if you're a practitioner, except. There's always an except. And the except is that this means now that what we do is under a scrutiny that it has never been under before. Management, boards, fellow managers are all looking at us and saying, well, okay, we understand the philosophy, but what exactly do you do that makes you an important member of senior management? Do you get the word out? Is that what you do? You communicate to us and to our publics, and is that the extent of it? And if so, is that enough, or is there something else you can do? Now, this scrutiny, of course, raises many questions. People start wondering, people who are not professionals start wondering, what do you do? But those of us who are practitioners begin wondering, how much might we be able to do? Our body of knowledge, which has now been codified and published, as you know, tells us that there is a tremendous amount that we can do. Management is starting to tell us something even more stringent. Management is really, I think, asking this question. If we communicate, if we have relationships with our various publics, what's the reason we do this? What's the bottom line that public relations can deliver? Well, I want to talk about what I think that bottom line is, and I call it behavioral public relations. Now, notice that word. The implication here, I trust, is clear. To me, the bottom line of public relations practice is not communication. It isn't even the building of relationships, as important as that is. The bottom line is behavior. Now, this is evolutionary or revolutionary, I have to admit that. It is at least different. Many people in our field, maybe most people in our field, have a belief that if indeed the communication takes place, that somehow wonderful things are going to happen. My experience is, and our research shows this very strongly, that organizations and management's questions aren't satisfied that communication took place. And if you don't believe it, just when you go back tomorrow, inevitably, I know this will happen in every organization in this world tomorrow, there'll come a time during the day when something didn't happen that was supposed to happen. Maybe it'll be you that is responsible. And your boss will turn to you and say, well, I don't understand this. How come this didn't occur? And you'll say, well, I don't understand it either. I sent the memo. You see, I communicated the information. How come nothing happened? Well, it's that kind of a situation that leads us to behavioral public relations. Because if you will just stop to think, back off a minute and look at our field and the work that we do, if you were the CEO, what would you expect? Now just think about that question. What would you expect if you were the CEO? If you come running into the meeting and say, this is wonderful, we got the front page in the New York Times, or gee, we were on the evening news and television, or 100 people showed up at the meeting. If you were the CEO, wouldn't you have a question beyond that? Wouldn't you say, yeah, but so what? I mean, that's wonderful. The material got communicated, so what? What has happened as a result of that? And that's what behavioral public relations is. It's stepping up to the plate and admitting to ourselves that all the things we do are in fact process, unless someone does something, doesn't do something, or gives us a willing suspension of disbelief and just sits back and says, okay, I will let you and your organization do something. Don't worry, the public will tell us when to stop when they remove their consent. But in the meantime, they're either going to do something, not do something, or give us some consent to go ahead and try something. In fact, if you really want to get harsh about it, and let's face it, it's no secret that there has been some downsizing in certain areas of public relations, that downsizing takes place because when the so what question is asked, those folks are unable to say that they indeed did something that caused a change in behavior, no behavior, consent. Because stop to think. If indeed nothing changes, if people's behavior isn't different after we work our magic, why should our organizations pay our salaries and give us our budgets? Because if there's no change, doesn't that imply that everything that happened probably would have happened anyway without us? Well, given this kind of bottom line zero-sum thinking, which of course is what organizational America, the whole nation, is going through these days, it becomes clear that there is another opportunity for us. And I believe that opportunity lies in our ability to show how the process that we apply to our organizations have as an outcome behavior. Because stop to think. When your boss asks you this question and you say, well, I got a lot of publicity, I did a lot of communication, a lot more people are aware, isn't it really legitimate for your boss to say, wait a minute, I assumed you could do that process stuff, or I never would have hired you. You know, this isn't learn on the job, you're a professional. And so I assumed you could do the process. What I expect now is that you will understand how to apply that process to give us the real outcomes, which are to modify, reinforce, or motivate the behaviors of the key publics that the organization depends on. If we don't move to something that is more evaluative, more measurable, something like behavior, I think public relations is going to not only miss an important opportunity to contribute to organizations and to society, but you and I may find other people doing what we now do. Well, if the belief that communications could motivate behavior had any substance to it, clearly the scholars would have been able to find it. But if you pursue and peruse PRSA's own body of knowledge, I'm afraid you'll find that there is simply no evidence. What communication can do, and I think we need to be clear on this, communication can make people aware of an issue, a product, a service, a point of view, and of course that's important. Without that, those folks cannot participate. And so we need that communication, we need that awareness. But unfortunately, in the last 10 years, we have just a library full of scholarly studies that show us that particularly today, communication is in one ear and out the other for most of us most of the times. There are a lot of reasons for this. You know them as well as I do. Over-communication. Is there anybody here that did not leave a stack of ingoing and outgoing communications to come to this meeting? If there is, I'd really like to meet you afterwards. You are a very rare breed. Most of us, in fact, have those kind of incoming and outgoing piles of communications, not just on our desk, but on the credenza and on a table. And in my office, I'll tell you, they're on the floor, because who can deal with it today? Well, now, in that kind of a world, it's pretty easy to postulate that communication isn't going to hit nearly as many people as it used to. And that's an important reason why we need to move towards behavioral public relations. In the 80s, the demographers told us clearly that the mass market was a thing of the past. And we're seeing that so clearly. Did you see Time magazine last week? If you're a subscriber, you know that your name was on the cover of Time. It said right there, hey, Joe Blow, and then it went on to tell about a story you should read inside. If you were a newsstand buyer, you remember it said, hey, you at the newsstand, read such and such a story. Direct mail now comes with your own name, as you know, in the cartoons on the envelopes. Television will very soon, particularly cable television, will very soon be able to have commercials where they talk to you, where they say, you, Susie Smith, run out and buy some Alpo or some Clorox or whatever it is. Don't laugh. All this information is in their computers, and they're ready to do it now. They're just waiting for what they consider to be the opportune moment. Well, clearly, there's not much of a mass market left when communicators have to go to those depths in order to reach us. But now in the 90s, something even more important perhaps has happened. At the start of this decade, the demographers tell us that even the dominant market, a phrase which in the past has meant a market in which an organization was dominant enough that really competition could only nibble at the edges and take a bit of a piece of that market, but that dominant market would persist. Now the demographers tell us the dominant markets are also disappearing. What this means is, therefore, that no organization can any longer expect to have any audience out there that is going to automatically be theirs. That you can no longer fluff off service and individual attention to everyone in your market, if you're in the product or service business, or to everyone in your district, if you're in the political district, or make your own analogy. In short, as these markets have disappeared, and as public relations has become so much more personal, and so much less a mass communication phenomenon, it has opened to us this incredible possibility of really finding ways to deal with individuals, opinion leaders and others, in fashions that will in fact help us to motivate their behaviors. Now, if you just want to think about this a little further, because I think it's important that we all understand, first of all, that there is such a thing as behavioral public relations, and secondly, that it's something that you really aren't that far away from practicing if you just will think in these new terms, if you can bring yourself to do that. If you stop to think about it, what's on the printed page or the screen or the airwaves isn't really what matters, is it? I mean, what's on the printed page is sort of minor, because what's on that page has to be translated into what's in the hearts and minds of the audience that you're trying to reach. Now, a lot of our emphasis until now has been on this printed page, tube, airwaves. But if you stop to think about it, even what's in the hearts and minds of our publics isn't all that important either, for this reason. If the printed page is less important than hearts and minds is also somewhat less important, because hearts and minds implies that everyone has a share in this. The fact is, as the sociologists keep telling us, that what really matters is what's in the hearts and minds of a certain relatively small group of people who are the opinion leaders in whatever public it is we're after. Now, I know this always sounds very undemocratic and something that Tom Jefferson wouldn't approve of, but just stop to think for a minute. If society did not function on the basis of opinion leaders, if the dictum that every American can really participate in every decision were truly followed by every American, just think about the consequences. Supposing 250 million Americans really cared about anything, and they all wanted to talk and be heard on that subject. It would be chaos. Even in our little New England towns, people are always bemoaning how few people come to town meeting. Can you imagine what would happen in any town if everybody showed up? Again, there wouldn't be a place to hold them.